When Vic Amuso became the boss of the Lucchese Crime Family, his first chief advisor was allegedly not Anthony Casso, but an older mobster who was rarely discussed. Let's check it out. I'm James Gladwish, and welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a quick look at Ettore Eddie Coco, a Lucchese family mobster who was an advisor to family boss Vic Amuso. When Vittorio Vic Amuso became the head of the Lucchese crime family towards the latter part of 1986, the initial hierarchy of the Lucchese family under his leadership did not feature his close friend Anthony Casso. Vic Amuso's first underboss was an old-school mobster called Mariano Mac Macaluso. Vic Amuso's first Consigliere was a colourful gangster by the name of Ettore Eddie Coco. Genovese soldier turned informant Vincent Fish Cafaro would testify that he had heard about the new hierarchy of the Lucchese family from another mobster called Ralph the General Tutino. Cafaro would state, "A few days later, Ralph told me that Eddie Coco, Mariano Macaluso, and Vic Amuso were now running things for the Lucchese family." Amuso's mentor was Christy Tick, who was and still is in prison, who backed Amuso in his bid for power. Eddie Coco is the power behind Amuso. Even though Amuso is boss, he takes counsel from Eddie Coco. Of course, Anthony Casso's role in advising Vic Amuso cannot be denied. And around a year later, Anthony Casso would be in the hierarchy of the family himself. However, it is interesting to hear from Vincent Cafaro that with Christopher Christy Tickfanari in prison, it was Ettore Eddie Coco, Vic Amuso's first consigliere, who was the power behind Amuso in his first year in charge. So, what do we know about Ettore Eddie Coco? Eddie Coco was born on July the 12th, 1908. It is unclear when exactly, but he would be inducted into the Lucchese crime family, potentially back when it was under the leadership of Tommy Gagliano. Eddie Coco would become a prominent but secretive figure in the sport of boxing. And, along with the likes of Frankie Carbo and Frank Blinky Palermo, helped control the fight game for many years. Eddie Coco was in fact the secret manager of Rocky Graziano. In 1952, Rocky Graziano would testify that since the start of his professional boxing career in 1943, he had been paying money to Eddie Coco. One newspaper stated, "Under oath, Graziano told the commission that he broke off with Coco last January. He admitted that up until that time, he had paid Coco 11% of his purses since he started boxing as a professional in 1943. At some point, potentially in the late 1940s, Eddie Coco was promoted to the position of captain. He would run a crew based in Harlem. The details around this are unclear, but what is known is that despite having a crew in New York, Eddie Coco would move down to Miami. Much like Michael Trigger Mike Coppola, the longtime captain of the Genovese crime family's 116th Street crew. In 1951, a drunken Eddie Coco shot and killed Johnny Smith outside Coco's Miami Beach apartment. Johnny Smith was a 43-year-old man who regularly washed Eddie Coco's car. Coco and a female companion returned from a night out and bumped into Johnny Smith, and the pair allegedly had words about money that Eddie Coco owed Smith for cleaning his car. One newspaper reported, "The couple greeted Smith, who asked Coco if he could pay him money due him for car wash jobs, then so that he would not have to wake him later. Coco said something to Smith. Then the couple entered the apartment," Williams said. A few minutes later, Coco came out and went to his car, according to Williams' statement to detectives. An instant later, police said, he fired 2 shots at Smith and a third as Smith staggered away from a car where he was working. Then, Williams testified, Coco stood over Smith after he fell to the roadway and pumped 2 more shots into his body. After shooting Johnny Smith, Eddie Coco went into his apartment and passed out. When the police arrived, they found Eddie Coco asleep next to his female companion, Rosalie Place. Later that year, in 1951, Eddie Coco was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Johnny Smith. However, he was released on bail pending an appeal of his conviction. A second trial was scheduled for 1953, and by the time of this trial, it was reported that the bullets found at the crime scene had gone missing. However, Eddie Coco was again found guilty for the murder of Johnny Smith. But, as before, Coco was released on bail pending another appeal. His final appeal was turned down in 1955, and the mobster would start serving his life sentence. When Eddie Coco's legal problem started, various FBI files state that he was succeeded as a captain by Lucchese mobster Big John Ormento. One FBI file states, Ettore Coco, prior to his incarceration in the Florida State Prison at Rayford, Florida, was a capo in the Lucchese family. After Coco began serving his prison sentence, John Ormento took over his position in the Lucchese family. Ettore, Eddie Coco, would serve 10 years of his life sentence, before being released from prison on August the 17th, 1965. Despite his conviction for drunkenly murdering a citizen, it appears that Eddie Coco still had respect in the underworld. And after the death of family boss Tommy Lucchese, Eddie Coco was allegedly considered a candidate to take over the family. One FBI file states, MMT19 on July 31, 1967, advised that Eddie Coco was being considered for the spot formerly held by Three Fingers Brown in the LCN. Brown is the alias of the late Thomas Lucchese. After the death of Lucchese, a meeting was held in Miami between Eddie Coco, Johnny Dio Diaguardi, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, and Carmine Mr. Gribbs Tramunti. One FBI file states, on July 17, 1967, NYT 159 advised that James Plumeri indicated that a meeting might be held on July 19, 1967 in Miami between himself, Eddie Coco, Johnny Diaguardi, Tony Ducks Corallo, and Carmine Tramunti. He stated the purpose of this meeting was allegedly to discuss the proposed new leadership of this family. Around this time, one informant would say of Eddie Coco, MMT31 further advised that Eddie Coco is well liked within the family because he has been handling himself very well and in spite of his lifetime parole in Florida, is considered to be very clean. Some sources even state that for a period in 1967, Ettore Eddie Coco served as acting boss of the Lucchese family before Carmine Mr. Gribbs Tramunti took over as official boss. Eddie Coco would continue to operate in Florida, secretly backing fighters and running a successful loan sharking business. However, in 1972, 7 years after being released from prison, Eddie Coco was found guilty of extortion. As one newspaper reported, Ettore Eddie Coco, who police say was a contender for a top mafia post in the 1960s, was found guilty Saturday of conspiracy, extortion and shylocking. In the late 1960s, Coco, on a life parole from a murder conviction, was considered by New York police to be a nominee to succeed the late Thomas Three Fingers Brown Lucchese as head of a New York Mafia family. The FBI says Coco couldn't take the job because his parole was conditioned on his staying in Florida. Eddie Coco was sentenced to 15 years in prison. After being released from prison, the respected Eddie Coco then next surfaces as new boss Vic Amuso's Consigliere, and, as one informant stated, was the power behind Amuso. However, we can speculate that potentially Vic Amuso may have been advised by the likes of Anthony Corallo to have an old-timer like Eddie Coco as an advisor. Eddie Coco would step down as Consigliere sometime later in 1987. He was succeeded by Vic Amuso's close friend, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. Despite getting on in years and being semi-retired, Eddie Coco was again in court in 1990 on a money laundering charge. As one newspaper reported, 6 reputed mobsters pleaded innocent in federal court yesterday to charges that they laundered cash from gambling, loan sharking and interstate theft operations through Bingo World, an Anne Arundel County bingo parlour. Ettore, Eddie Coco, the oldest, struggled to hear the judge's questions. His lawyer, Irving Analik, said, "Mr. Coco of the Bronx is extremely hard of hearing and has diabetes and other ailments." He was identified in a US Senate report as a boss in the Lucchese crime family. Ettore Eddie Coco would never be convicted of the money laundering charge, as he passed away in 1991 at the age of 83. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.